Hello, and welcome to our very first podcast, In Defense of Freedom. I'm Steve Colby. I'm going to be editing and producing these segments. And with us today is Stephen Bailey, and he is going to be the host of In Defense of Freedom. So, Stephen, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
Well, Steve, yes, my name is Stephen Bailey. I have taken over recently as the president of the California Constitutional Rights Foundation. Our foundation is a little over 5 years old and was extremely active during the COVID period. Our founding president, Gary Creep, and I are retired California judges. Gary has recently retired from the practice of law, and so I've taken up the foundation to refocus it and get it ready for the Trump era. It's kind of an exciting opportunity. I've got 30 plus years as a California lawyer, previously a certified specialist in criminal law. And frankly, that's how the foundation started. Back in 2020, when Governor Newsom decided that he was going to not allow people out of their homes and prohibit them from peacefully protesting at the state capitol, our foundation, which was in its infancy at that time, stepped in to defend individuals, primarily mothers, who went down to the capitol to say, hey, you can't keep my kids out of school. You've got to treat the populace fairly. And that is why the foundation started. And that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years, is protecting people's right to protest, their right to free speech, their right to religious liberty. I'm proud to be associated with the foundation.
As am I. I'm very proud. So what were some of the first cases that CCRF worked on?
As I mentioned just now, we started out by defending moms and dads who went to the state capitol to protest. And while we were doing that, a number of other individuals, primarily restaurant owners, employees for college districts, came to us and asked us if we wouldn't step in and represent them. And we were pleased to do that. It was an exciting time because what we were doing is standing up and defending the basic principles of our Constitution and the Constitution of our state. California grants the same rights as our United States Constitution does, to be free to protest, to be free to speak our minds when we want and in a way that we want. And so we stepped in and we defended dozens upon dozens of individuals throughout the state of California, from Northern California all the way down to the Mexican border. And doing that, we were able to make a difference here in California. It was a difficult time for all of us, but the foundation and the foundation's work was instrumental in helping change the way this governor operated and give us our freedoms back. It was a hard-fought battle, but eventually we won.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, Steve, let's hear a little bit more about you and your background.
I became a California attorney in 1990. I enjoyed litigation. And the way to get into litigation and trial work was to get into criminal defense. You know, frankly, I would have been a prosecutor. I thought that was where my calling was. But by the time I became an attorney, I had 3 little kids. I had a mortgage to pay, and I had to get out and work my tail off. And so I got into the area of criminal defense, spent 20 plus years as a criminal defense attorney, handled every type of case you could think of, from the simplest disturbing the peace up to death penalty cases. So I'm familiar with criminal law. In 2009, I took a seat on the Superior Court in El Dorado County, California, served for 8.5 years as a Superior Court judge, and retired in 2017. The reason for retiring at that time was that I had made the decision that I was going to run for California Attorney General. And in 2018, I was the conservative Republican candidate endorsed by the California Republican Party and a number of other important groups in California to run for Attorney General. We were just a little bit too early, I think, because some of the issues that we were talking about in 2018 are issues that in 2024, the electorate finally woke up and realized that the problem was so great that they had to change the way the law was. Mm-hmm. So we were talking about issues such as career thieves going into stores and stealing, people going in with a pad of paper and a calculator to make sure that they didn't exceed $950 so they couldn't be charged with a felony. Then when criminal justice reform came, we started changing the way the criminal codes were being handled in California. We spoke about that during the campaign for Attorney General, and we did well, but not well enough to get elected with a majority of the vote. Right. So at the end of that campaign, several judges, Gary Creep and I in particular, sat down together and started talking about what could we do that would make a difference here in the state of California. And we concluded that what we could do was to step in on election integrity issues, on First Amendment freedom of speech issues. We had no idea at the time, as none of us did, that shortly the government would begin to tell us, you can't leave your home because there's this pandemic. You can't say things that are out of the mainstream. You were prohibited from free thinking in this state. Early in 2020, the governor and the president all ordered us to stay home. We were going to stop the spread. 3 weeks, we were going to stop the spread. The politicians loved the power that they received.
Oh, yeah.
We stayed home. That was certainly true. But it soon became clear that the science didn't meet up with the reality. We weren't stopping the spread. Mm-hmm. Moreover, the science was that masks didn't work. The pandemic was more serious than the flu. So I'm not trying to minimize what happened during the pandemic, but it wasn't as serious as, say, smallpox, where people were dying, would die from a really infectious disease. And what we ended up with was government overreaching, telling our businesses, telling our citizens that we were prohibited, one, from deviating from the standardized thought, and that we were prohibited from leaving our homes. That didn't set well with either Gary or I. And when we had the opportunity to stand up and help defend people who had similar concerns, we stood up and we stepped in to defend them.
Yep. So where's the CCRF today? What's going on with the CCRF right now?
Well, as you can see, we are now starting up a podcast. It's going to be, we're going to talk a little bit about current events. We're going to talk a little bit about things that are serious. And we hope that we'll talk on some days about things that aren't particularly serious. Get a little humor going. I don't know that I'm the comedian that can do it, but we're going to try to make our programs interesting. So we've got the podcast, we've got the CCRF website, and those of you who are watching this, I'd encourage you to go take a look at our website. It's cacrf.org. This has kind of a history of what the foundation's been doing. Those of you who appreciate the work that we've done in the past and the work that we're trying to do into the future, we would encourage you to help support the foundation. In the end, we're going to move forward, support people who don't have the resources to be able to fight the system. We'll stand up with the foundation, and we will help defend people who deserve a solid and complete defense in a court of law.
Nice. Very nice. So where do we intend to go, and how are we going to do it with the CCRF?
Well, one, we're going to educate the public using the podcast. So on, probably every time we have a podcast, we'll be talking about some issue. We'll discuss where some of the political parties are and what they are trying to do and how they're trying to make our lives better. We'll talk about litigation, not always litigation that the foundation's engaged in, but litigation that other individuals are pursuing, other foundations, other attorneys around the United States. We're not going to focus exclusively on California, although a lot of what we're going to talk about will be California specific.
Right.
For example, there's a farmer up in Montana. The government Bureau of Land Management decided was encroaching upon some federal land. We're going to talk about that. We'll try to get a hold of their lawyers and put them on our podcast so that we can hear what's happening in their case. What was interesting about that case is that this rancher had been grazing this property for nearly 100 years. They pre-existed the Bureau of Land Management even. All these years, the Bureau and this rancher had worked cooperatively together to protect the environment and to protect the grazing land until one agent who thought he was more important than any other person in society decided to come out and demand that the farmer move his fence. Now, we're not talking about tens of thousands of acres that this rancher was encroaching on. We're talking about maybe several hundred acres. The agreement between the Bureau supervisors and the rancher were that they would get a survey done and find out where the border of the property was, and then they would resolve it without litigation. What ended up happening was the agent on the ground went and got a surveyor, unbeknownst to anyone else, including the rancher, went out and surveyed the property and then showed up at the rancher's home with a SWAT team and arrested him.
Oh, my gosh.
For trespass on federal ground.
Wow.
Well, we've seen this happen on multiple occasions where the government, for no apparent good reason, decides that they're going to arrest somebody, they're going to prosecute them as if they were Al Capone. And when you look at some of the issues such as this, there's no reason when you're trying to work together and the rancher and the Bureau supervisors are all meeting and talking about it, there's no reason to send a SWAT team to the guy's home and arrest him as if he were, a murderer or something. Well, the government did that, and it's currently being litigated in federal court. They will resolve it eventually, probably to the rancher's benefit. In the meantime, there's tens of thousands of dollars that are being expended by this rancher to defend himself on a relatively minor land issue.
Right.
The foundation is looking for cases such as that. We want to be able to step in and defend them against government overreach. There's no question that what's happened in this case is a gigantic overreach by federal agents when nothing was required other than to sit down and resolve the issue. It's not like it had festered for years. It was a brand new issue, and the way they addressed it was to send the SWAT team out. I think that's unconscionable. It's ridiculous. And no citizen of this country should be subjected to that.
Oh, yeah.
Now, hopefully, with the demise of the Biden administration and the Trump administration coming in the future, we're not going to run into those kinds of problems. But we know from past experience that these things crop up from time to time. And so the foundation is essential to being able to step in and defend people like this rancher. And so we're looking for those cases.
Nice.
We're looking for cases where, mom goes down to the school and they determine that she's now a terrorist. We're looking for cases to be able to step in and clear people's records. Some of this stuff is, I mean, it's beyond the pale. And when we talk about it, you think it's got to be a joke.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, these kinds of things happen all the time when you're dealing with a bloated government like we have in this country.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that ranch in Montana, that sounds exactly like an episode of Yellowstone. It's like to a T.
The worst part about it is that even the writers on Yellowstone couldn't imagine this happening. Hopefully, we don't get into shooting and dropping people down at the train station.
Yeah.
But, never know in this business.
You never know.
And our goal is to sit with those individuals, help step in, defend them, and change the way the government functions, by getting the courts involved, getting judges to issue appropriate orders, and hopefully we don't have these kinds of issues in the future.
Yeah, hopefully. So what else what's currently going on in California that struck your interest lately?
We've finished up our litigation on the COVID cases. We're looking at a particular election integrity issue that might pop up. We've been concerned, as I mentioned before, let's go back a second.
Yeah.
We actually began focused on election integrity back in 2019, 2020.
Right.
We couldn't foresee COVID, I guess is the way it amounts. And so we were looking at cases where progressives had begun to change the way our elections would be handled. We were concerned about the top two primary. I had successfully waded through that process and became one of the two candidates listed on the ballot in 2018. But it was of concern to me that others that would want to run for, say, the office of Attorney General, who had views that differed from mine, the top two basically prevented them from being able to express their views and talk to voters about them and solicit voters' support. There's been a recent filing by the Peace and Freedom Party, by the Green Party, and by the Libertarian Party of California that would overturn the top two primary and allow those, what I would call minor parties, to participate in the general election ballot. California has a very restrictive process for being able to be on the ballot. While you can run candidates kind of in a jungle fashion in the March or June primaries, depending on whether it's a gubernatorial or a presidential year, what you can't do is, if you're not in the top two, you cannot appear on California's ballot. We agree with the proponents of that litigation,
right,
that it is not fair and it suppresses free speech.
Yeah.
So we're looking very closely at involving ourselves in a supportive role of that litigation. The case is called Peace and Freedom Party versus Weber. It was recently filed in the Northern District of California in the Oakland District. So anyone who wants to look the case up, it's a current case, and it's one that the foundation's looking at very closely to be supportive of. If we do get involved in it, we would seek to assist the proponents financially by intervening possibly in the case, by encouraging other plaintiffs, Republicans and Democrats, who are equally concerned about the lack of our ability to be able to influence California elections.
Yeah.
We'll ask them if they want to participate in the case, and we may file pleadings to intervene in the case. We just think that these are the kinds of issues in California that we need to have the foundation involved in.
Right.
We're also looking at some issues related to voter ID. We have been studying that issue for some time. We may well want to participate in the voter ID litigation that we think will come up within the next year or two. There's no reason that voter ID shouldn't be a part of California law. If you have been following the news recently, there was a case out of Huntington Beach where the Attorney General filed lawsuit against the city of Huntington Beach because in municipal elections in Huntington Beach, they were requiring voter ID. That case is still in litigation. At the current time, the Superior Court has issued an injunction against the state to prevent them from prohibiting Huntington Beach from requiring voter IDs. So there's progress being made, at least on the municipal level.
Nice.
And we're kind of looking at participating in that kind of litigation in the future.
Yeah.
Again, anyone who's watching our podcast today who wants to help support that kind of litigation can go to our website at cacrf.org and just click on the donation button and help us out with a donation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, good. I'm excited for the future. I'm excited for CCRF. I'm excited for this podcast, In Defense of Freedom. And I think it's about time for us to flip over to part 2 of this first podcast, where we talk to you in a different setting.
Okay.
We're glad that you're joining us here today. We're going to learn a little bit about the CCRF, the California Constitutional Rights Foundation. And Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I'm a lawyer, obviously. CCRF has been dedicated over the last 5 years toward defending our freedom of speech. We started as a result of the COVID epidemic, and we've been going relatively strong for the last 5 years. Focus has been on defending restaurants and other businesses, individuals, community colleges, federal workers, people that have been arrested for peaceful protests down at the Capitol when the governor didn't want to hear any negative voices during COVID. In fact, that actually is what got the foundation really moving, is the fact that a group of individuals in 2020 decided after 2 months of being locked in their homes that they'd go down to the Capitol and protest being locked up. That's one of those things that we as free citizens here in this country are able to do, that is to go and make our voices heard. Well, Governor Newsom didn't think that that was appropriate during COVID. And so he refused. He, in fact, ordered the Highway Patrol not to give a permit to protest at the Capitol. And when a group of people did, they, in fact, arrested 35 of those individuals for trespassing people's property, believe it or not. We stepped in. We represented 30 of the 35, and the district attorney in Sacramento had enough sense to simply say, we're not going to prosecute these people, and the cases all went away. And that is, in fact, what got us started.
Oh, that's great. I like that a lot. Now, tell me about the restaurants. And this is actually where you and I were introduced a couple years back with the Restaurant Coalition in Nevada County. Do you have a moment to speak about that? I'm very interested and very involved with that, actually.
So what ended up happening was Governor Newsom was closing restaurants, closing businesses throughout California, opening them up, closing them down. And the destructive effect of opening and closing, you lose your employees. The businesses are investing literally thousands of dollars into making improvements in their restaurants to clean the air, because we were all concerned at that time that if we didn't clean every surface, with disinfectant 20 times a day, people were going to die. I don't want to make light of COVID. It was a serious disease, particularly in the beginning, because we didn't have treatments for it. But after 6 or 8 weeks of being locked in your home, the science was beginning to evolve. We knew that masks didn't work. We knew that we weren't stopping the spread of the disease. What was happening was we were simply destroying our small businesses, here in California and frankly around the country. Right. Moreover, people were being negatively impacted by the rules and regulations. A few businesses in Nevada County and Placer throughout California decided that time had come that they had to stay open or they went out of business forever. And so in Nevada County, there was a group of restaurants that decided after the governor had closed them, opened them, closed them, and then came up with a whole new set of rules to decide, how many people you could have in your restaurant, and it changed every single week. Suddenly, they were in a situation where if they closed up again, they weren't going to reopen. So the county, using the powers that had been vested in them by the state of California, decided that they were going to issue fines. And so those businesses came to me, asked me to step in and represent them. And what we were able to do is to work out initially an arrangement that would get those businesses back open. They would be in compliance with the state guidelines throughout the months of August and September and October of 2020. Every single week, at the most, every 2 weeks, the requirements would change.
I remember that.
One week you would be at 50% of capacity. Another week you'd be at 25% of capacity. You could dine outdoors. Turns out that 2020 was one of the worst fire years California's ever had. You could be sitting out in the smoke outside, but you couldn't sit inside because, we had to protect against COVID. So you could poison yourself with smoke and ash, but you couldn't be inside where you had air conditioning and you had devices to clean the air. And so it became kind of a joke. Well, we knew and advised our clients that, look, what's going to happen is winter's going to come, the flu season's going to begin, and they're going to shut you down again. And so on the 11th of November of 2020, we filed suit against Nevada County, against the state of California for these kinds of arbitrary, unscientific, quite frankly, rules that they had constructed. And as we went along, that lawsuit progressed. Late the following year, 2021, they finally lifted the requirements. But 2.5 years later, we were still litigating issues against Nevada County. The courts made some rulings. The suit was narrowed to deal with some threats that had been made by government officials. They let the state of California out of the lawsuit. Ultimately, the courts had no desire to deal with any of these issues. And so what ended up happening is that earlier this year, the court finally ruled and dismissed the entire lawsuit on a summary judgment motion. So we kept our businesses open. Many of them were damaged and ultimately had to close. After 4 years of litigation, we were able to save at least, some of our businesses. We were able to make a point. This type of draconian overreach by the government had to stop, and hopefully we'll never see this kind of litigation again, but this kind of government overreach again.
Right. Yeah, I remember that very well. I produced quite a few video segments on that. One of my pieces was amplifying if there's one person affected, like let's say a server at a restaurant, like Friar Tuck's, for example.
Right.
One server at that restaurant is not just affecting that server. It's affecting that server's wife and kids, or if it's a mom, the mom and the kids and the husband and then the grandparents. And so one person is actually affecting about 40 people.
That's exactly right. And during that period of time, our schools were closed, you couldn't go to a hairdresser. You could go to the marijuana dealer. And maybe that's what we all should have done. I mean, we would have been very relaxed if we had done that. Although we couldn't, you really weren't supposed to go to the grocery store.
Yeah.
So you couldn't get your munchies. So I don't know how you were going to function. But, that was a time that none of us want to go back to. The foundation was there to help defend at that time. We continue to move forward in protecting our small businesses, protecting our civil rights. That's really the focus and the function of the California Constitutional Rights Foundation.
That's fantastic. I'm a big fan, and I'm proud to be involved with this.